Ukraine aid has been blocked since last September for over 6 months. For half of a year, Ukraine aid, when originally proposed to be passed again last September, has been held up by a variety of factors. It was held up by the fact that the fringe of the Republican right did everything in their power, from Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Andy Biggs, and others in the Freedom Caucus, did everything they could to undermine having a vote on Ukraine aid. Now, let me be clear. The only reason they were able to do this is because the Republican majority is so small, and the Republican rules stipulating that all it required is one person to call a recall vote to then send the Republican Party into a tizzy into who's going to be its new speaker. All it requires is one person, giving individuals in the party, especially fringe individuals who want to hold the party hostage over an issue, much more leverage than they had, say, during Nancy Pelosi's speakership reign when this wasn't the rule. So a combination of their small majority and just needing one for the recall vote gave the fringe much more leverage to hold this over the head of the Republican Party. Now, this wasn't the only thing that stopped a vote on Ukraine aid. There was the problem of Donald Trump and others pushing towards the, well, not Donald Trump specifically, but Donald Trump comes into it. Others saying that in order for there to be Ukraine aid, there has to be immigration compromises, that they have to give Republicans what they want on immigration. Now, there was negotiations on immigration, and it happened over months. I think it was like 5 months of negotiation between, I believe it was Democratic senators. I'm trying to remember which ones. I know on the Republican side, it was the ultra-conservative from Utah, Senator James Lankford, who negotiated a deal that included Ukraine aid and border crossing policies, giving many concessions to Republicans and a few concessions for Democrats, but mostly concessions aimed at pleasing Republicans, giving them things that they've been asking for well over a decade. Now, this aid package was set to pass, and I think what it was like January, maybe? I forget exactly when it was getting all put together. January, February, I forget exactly when. But as it was getting ready to pass, mind you, Democrats had control of the Senate and the presidency, meaning that this legislation could only pass with Democratic support, and Democrats controlled 2 chambers. Not one chamber, but 2 chambers. Republicans only had a slight majority in the House, and they were getting a lot of concessions. But there was 2 complaints. The smaller one was that there wasn't enough concessions, that Republicans needed more. They needed Trump's wall. They needed the return to Mexico policy. But I would counter that Democrats won in 2020. Republicans got a very small majority in 2022. They historically underperformed. They certainly did not win the mandate to go back against the policies that Joe Biden wanted to implement when it came to immigration, in comparison to Donald Trump, who lost the last election. You cannot expect to lose an election and then institute all of your policies anyway. That's usually not how these election things work out. So that's the first thing. But the bigger problem was that Donald Trump didn't want any border compromises. He was scared, and this is open knowledge to James Lankford and to others who have said this publicly. Donald Trump knew, or this is at least his perspective, that if there was a compromise on the border while Joe Biden was president, then Joe Biden going into 2024 could say, hey, look, we compromised on the border. We have this victory on the border. We know what we're doing. And if he can do that, then maybe that can undermine one of the main campaign messages of Donald Trump ever since he jumped off the escalator in 2015, which is we need to stop the waves of immigration coming across the southern border. And so for electoral reasons, not legislative reasons, not because the Republicans wouldn't be getting victories that they would otherwise be unable to get come a few months from now, come 2025, even if Republicans control the Senate, the House, and the presidency, they'd still need 60 votes in the Senate to get past the filibuster. They're going to need some compromises with Democrats to get any of this stuff done. But the electoral priorities superseded what Republicans said was a national security priority on the southern border. I'll just throw something out there. If something is a national security priority, you don't say when given a semi-solution or some answers that solve some of the problems but not all the problems, you don't say no because it doesn't fix everything, or no because it's an election year. If it's truly a national security priority, you treat it like a national security priority. If we were getting invaded by Canada, Would we be like, well, we could pass this bill to give the troops more munitions, but it doesn't do everything, so we're not going to pass anything along at all. And plus, if we do, then Biden might claim some battlefield victory during his election. This is how democracies destroy each other, where the goal is rather, if the Republican viewpoint is to be believed, that these were good compromises, that these were policies that needed to be happened, that this is a major issue, but we're not going to compromise on it because it's an election year. That's how you ignore national security priorities. What they say is a national security priority. That is choosing party over country if the issue is as big as Republicans claim. Anyway, moving forward, once that plan sunk, Mike Johnson was in this difficult position where, on one hand, he knows that if he passes this deal, he's going to get the ire of Donald Trump and other Republicans because some wanted to go further and others didn't want any settlement to begin with because they didn't want Biden to be able to claim it. But on the other hand, he had publicly said, after committing at the start of his time as House Speaker to never abandon Ukraine, he said that the only way that they could get any Ukraine aid through is through border compromises. So now he would risk having to go back on his word and angering many people in the House. Trump and others had just put Mike Johnson, who already had a slim House majority, between a rock and a hard place. No way to win. It's a conversation of which shit sandwich he wanted to eat. And I would probably point towards the one that prioritizes America's national security, since, you know, you are supposed to represent the United States as House Speaker after all. Anyway, this was the pickle Mike Johnson was in for months, unknowing how to move forward. And so then the excuse became, well, you know, we have all these other issues we have to deal with first. We have to deal with this budget because the budget reconciliation kept getting kicked down the road again and again and again and again and again. And so Mike Johnson said for a bit, well, I have to deal with this. And then when we deal with this, then maybe we'll deal with Ukraine aid. Now, I would say that a House Speaker probably has to deal with sometimes one, but even on occasion, two, sometimes three, by God, possibly even four things at the same time. It's a busy job. If you didn't know that in the job description, maybe you shouldn't have signed up for it. Anyway, once all the excuses fell apart and all that was left after getting past the budget reconciliation and everything else was this deal, Mike Johnson sat down and was able to negotiate some deal within the confines of the Republican Party. Not without resistance, though. Now, there were compromises, including a meeting with Donald Trump to try to finagle the deal a little bit to try to include Trump's concerns, even though the man's not even in office. For example, this is basically the same deal, but there's 3 changes to it that was passed. And let's get through this quick before we look at some of the reaction. The first change is that the financial aid to Ukraine was turned into a loan. So instead of giving over $7 billion in financial aid, it is now a non-interest loan, meaning the Ukrainians in the future would have to pay us back for that assistance. The second thing is that a report has to be produced within 45 days of the bill being passed and signed by the President of the United States into law. A report would have to be made about the United States' goals in Ukraine. And the third thing is that the President of the United States would have to send ATACMS, long-range ATACMS, to Ukraine. Now, it doesn't specify which ATACMS, so it could be more of the older 39 M-block ATACMS that only goes 165 kilometers and not the 300 kilometers that the Ukrainians have been asking for. But according to Senator Mark Warner, I believe in the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, he's saying that this type of stuff could be sent within a week of the bill's passage. There's also an asterisk attached to that saying that if the president determines that it's against the national security priorities of the United States to send these types of weapons because it could create a shortage, then the president could use that as an exception to not send them. But it is likely, with this pressure and this being in the legislation, that the ATACMS are going to be sent over. And it was rumors for months that the United States was moving and getting closer and closer to sending ATACMS to Ukraine as well. Whether or not that's going to come with a review of whether or not we're okay with Ukraine using American weapons in Russia proper so they can target the airfields, where the Russians are bombing Ukrainian cities from, I do not know. But we'll have to wait and see. There's a good chance that these will just be handed over so the Ukrainians can use it to more effectively strike areas of Crimea that are currently out of range, southern parts of Crimea, where Russia's storing a lot of their munitions to try to be less in range of Ukrainian strikes, storm shadows, etc. So, besides that, it's the same bill. It's the same amount of money, about a little bit over $60 billion. The only difference is about 7.3 or 8 of that is now a loan. It's the same exact bill. And there certainly isn't any justification. Definitely when the battlefield conditions are considered, when we consider the loss of Avdiivka, we consider the Russians pushing down south on Arihiv and on other locations, on Robotne, on how they're pushing around Avdiivka, or how they're pushing in the Seversk area, or how they're pushing on Kupiansk. There is no justification for waiting this long for a bill that is basically the same when time is of the essence on the battlefield. This isn't like a take it or leave it situation where if we just sit back and we negotiate and we sit on our hands as time passes, the battlefield situation or the negotiation is going to be the same. The negotiation, the leverage, the amount of hard power, the military capacity, everything changes on a day-to-day basis. Maybe not by a lot every day, but the situation does change. And so if we just stop sending supplies to the Ukrainians, I think in many people's minds, the idea was, oh, so the line will stay where it is. No, not necessarily. Just because the line is stabilized for now doesn't mean if you run out of ammunition, the line is going to stabilize forever. And so these are munitions that maybe could have had more of an impact in the Battle of Avdiivka. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily the Ukrainians would have been able to hold Avdiivka. Maybe they hold Avdiivka for another 1-2 months. But in those 1-2 months, the Russians could have taken more vehicle casualties, more personnel casualties, had to divert resources from other parts of the front, not intensify their airstrikes on the front, depending on good anti-air equipment, taking out airplanes, making the Russians have to pull back. If we provided, for example, attack them sooner during the Zaporizhia counteroffensive, maybe we could have disabled the helicopters sooner. Because right when we introduced the M39 block ATACMS, they were used immediately to disable the helicopters that were harassing Ukrainian troops down south since the start of the Zaporizhia counteroffensive. Point is, there is no tactical, strategic, or battlefield justification for holding up aid this long or holding up the investments into production of artillery shells this long, considering a lot of this is a logistics battle. Well, I mean, that's all war, isn't it? That is all war. There's no justification. You might be able to find some justification within Mike Johnson's personal political survival, but you'll be able to find no justification when it comes to the facts on the ground, on the battlefield. Okay, now that we put that aside, this is still a major victory. This is billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of weapons purchasing capital that the Ukrainians are going to have at their expense. The money that they're going to be getting as a loan, even if it's still now a loan, and so there's a question about the future burden that Ukraine is going to carry because of that loan, especially since they already need so much capital to rebuild the country in and of itself. That is still going to assist them to pay teacher salaries, to keep government workers employed, to keep the lights on. It's going to be necessary for the state to function. When 60% of Ukraine's budget, and that's the case, 60% of Ukraine's budget is allocated towards the war effort, you still need to pay for the rest of the government to function. And that is what that loan is going to allow them to do as they continue to fight the war. But the artillery shells and air defense are going to be the two things that are most crucially needed on the front that Ukraine needs almost instantaneously. They have a massive shell shortage, not only when it comes to traditional artillery shells or NATO standard 155 or the old Soviet shells, whether we're talking about mortars, ammunition generally on the artillery side is doing very poorly right now. And the Russians, according to the Ukrainian government, has a 10-to-1 shell advantage and a 30-to-1 aircraft advantage. And that 30-to-1 aircraft advantage is being leveraged more and more as they attach dummy glide bombs onto the bottom of these aircraft and bomb Ukrainian cities and forward operating positions as Russian assaults continue. Now, This could be undercut with stronger air defense on the front line, but as of right now, the Russians feel comfortable enough to continue these glide bomb attacks, which have been particularly destructive on the front line. And if you talk to anybody near the front line about the type of things they are scared of, glide bombs are damn near the top of the list. But that can only be countered by strong, continuous air defense that makes the Russians too scared to deploy their aircraft that close to the front line. That would be the only thing that can stop that. And that can only be provided by Ukraine's Western partners, since their domestic production of air defense is not strong enough. In order to keep the Russian troops from advancing forward, every single major battle in this war has been determined by artillery. This money is also probably going to be taken and delved a lot into artillery. We see the Estonian initiative to buy over 1 million shells for the Ukrainians. We see the Czech initiative to buy over 1 million shells for the Ukrainians. As the Slovak government is taking a step back and going in a more, I guess you could call it Russophile, whatever you want to call it, Russia simping direction, and saying that, oh, the concept of sovereignty is just an idea anyway. Really disgusting things. The Slovak population comes together and fundraises, led by a Holocaust survivor, for artillery shells. Everybody seems to acknowledge, a 99-year-old Holocaust survivor, true story, look it up. Everybody seems to acknowledge that artillery shells is a major deciding factor for this war. Despite what you might hear on Twitter about artillery and tanks, because tanks are also used for indirect fire support on the front line, even if they're not the best due to what that means for the gun barrels, these weapons are a major deciding factor of every battle of this war. If it's not going to be an extremely mobile war, it's going to be a question, a lot of the time, of how much firepower can be brought down on any particular position as it gets smashed before it gets taken by advancing troops. And if the Ukrainians have more firepower to fire at the attacking Russian soldiers, we should see a spike in Russian vehicle losses and a spike in Russian casualties if they keep up or intensify, either or, their attacks in eastern Ukraine. So artillery is going to be vital. There's probably also going to be some support for long-range capacity. We're already talking about the ATACMS earlier. Long-range weapons like ATACMS can be used to not only strike Russian ports and undermine the Black Sea Fleet down south, which has been taking loss after loss, but it could also be used to attack storehouses. It could also be used to attack points where troops are gathering before major assaults. It can be used to target their infrastructure. For example, bridges that support the war effort. The Kerch Strait and the Kerch Bridge is an example of something you could point to, which the Ukrainians very much would want to target. You could target communication centers. You could target barracks. You could target training centers. You could target airfields that are containing aircraft, or airfields that are being used in order to do strikes on Ukraine. So you would be defending Ukrainian cities by disabling the places where the attacks on Ukrainian cities are coming from. This is another thing that the aid will almost certainly be requested by the Ukrainian government for it to be used for, definitely since the bill is also talking about ATACMS. There's other things as well, like when we're talking about, for example, Bradleys, which have been found to be very useful on the battlefield, and it is a weapon that the United States government is trying to fade out of. It's a vehicle that the American government, while it admits it's doing well in Ukraine, they're generally moving away from. So don't be surprised if some of this money is also spent on Bradleys to support the front line, or parts and ammunition in order to support Bradleys. So these are some of the things that this could be used for. I heard some people say F-16s. I don't know if F-16s are going to be bought with this money. I am probably going to say no, maybe parts. But I think that they're probably going to rely on a lot of European partners and make sure that the bulk of this capital is spent on what is most directly needed. F-16s would not serve much of a ground strike capacity at this point. The Ukrainians simply do not have a large enough air force to do it. And even if they wanted to try to assault the frontline positions, they almost certainly don't have the manpower or munitions to do it right now. And so it would mostly serve, as of right now, a air defense capability of trying to strike incoming Shahed drones, Caliber missiles, all sorts of stuff. But generally, incoming projectiles headed towards Ukrainian cities with maybe isolated ground support roles and defense missions. Okay, now that we've gone through what the money is probably going to be used for, even if 20 billion of the sum is going straight towards replacing of our own stockpile. So that isn't even going to Ukraine. I want to move into some of the reaction. Oh, I almost forgot one last thing. There was also another piece of legislation that was passed that is going to allow the American government to seize $5 billion worth of Russian assets in the United States and transfer them over to Ukraine. I don't know if there's going to be any restrictions on what that money could be used for, if they could be used for weapons, if they can only be used for reconstruction. I know that was a discussion in Europe. I don't know as much about whether it was a discussion in the United States, but that is also something that's going on. Now, $5 billion in and of itself is not necessarily going to break the bank of the Russians, but $5 billion is something the Ukrainians, number one, will certainly still take, and two, it could be the start of a trend. If this creates a precedent and it's shown to be successful and European states start to act more penny pinching, either due to their domestic economic situation, public pressure, or whatever it might be, even if you're not penny pinching, just trying to increase the amount of resources at your disposal, taking Russian assets and using them, making the invading force and their economic capacity pay for the damage that they are doing is going to seem like a more and more considerable option as time goes on and there's financial questions. But also, if the Americans can do it first, then why can't other countries consider it? The bulk of Russian assets are in Belgium, though. Over $200 billion of Russian assets in Europe are in Belgium. So that's where the majority of them are concentrated. And there doesn't, while there's a semi-conversation about seizing them, most of the conversation right now seems to be around using the assets that they're accruing interest and the money that they make, and taking that money and sending that to Ukraine instead. So a type of half measure to try to not completely like take all the money and seize it and create that precedent, or to piss off the Russians too much. So instead just sending the accruing interest. And not only because there's a fear of like, oh, will Russia want to reintegrate in the future, or well, will other countries be scared that if they invade other countries, their assets may be seized? And I might lean personally towards, is that really such a terrible fear for a country to have, that they might invade another country and it might actually come with consequences? Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. But the big thing seems to be in my mind about the 200 billion is that a lot of them are scared that if they seize these assets, then Russia's just going to start seizing all these different European assets, and then the Western companies that are in Russia are going to lose all the assets that they have there as Russia takes them to try to fund the state. There's a good chance that that would happen. If I'm being completely honest with you, Russia would not want the seizing of their assets to go unresponded to. They would probably look for some response, and it would be logical that they would aim for seizing property. So at least that's some of the logic as to why they're not doing it. But the $5 billion in the United States being seized could create a precedent. Now that we've gotten through it, it's good that it's finally done. It should have been done 6 months ago. The bill's basically the same. The conversation shouldn't have been, oh, for 6 months, should we be doing this? The conversation should have been, hey, what's the best way to support Ukraine? Is 60 billion really the right number? If we did 70 billion, how much could another 10 billion do? If we did 75 billion, how much money would that take? Or, hey, does it make more sense to invest more now or less, but over a longer period of time? What's going to cost us less? What's going to leave Ukraine less damage? What's going to mean less risk over the long term? A lot of leadership is not completely avoiding risk. It's knowing how to manage risk. But that was not the conversation we have, and we are in the reality we're in, so we got to deal with the circumstances. Now that we know that that's the circumstances, I want to see some of the reaction to the Ukraine aid being passed. Because my goodness, while this is a big moment in history, it shows that America is still in the conversation, still in the corner behind Ukraine. You know, it sends a message to the Russians that, hey, support for Ukraine isn't ending anytime soon. This war's not ending this year. The Ukrainians are probably going to have the backing of the West for at least the foreseeable future. Of course, constraining any possible, let's just say, concerning electoral outcomes. As this is happening, I want to see the responses from the worst of the worst and the best of the best, but mostly the worst of the worst. First off, we should talk about Mike Johnson. Since Mike Johnson has gotten the aid through, and it actually happened, despite Marjorie Taylor Greene and others saying that they were going to stop it and they were going to be willing to do a recall vote, they never did it. They never pulled the trigger. They made so much noise. They screamed, they hollered. They oh my goodness, they screamed and hollered. But you know, a hit dog hollers. And I think that might be part of it. They understood that if they did another recall vote, the electoral consequences for Republicans could be potentially damaging. Not only damaging, potentially disastrous going into a campaign, a election year. Not any election year, mind you, a presidential election year. So I wanted to check out how these people are coping with the situation.
Mike Johnson.
Let's start with a report from Manu Raju talking to many of the hardliners about how this vote went.
Mike Johnson was not well known when he assumed the speakership 6 months ago. As a staunch social conservative and a skeptic of more Ukraine aid, hardliners thought he would advance their cause. But as he faces the realities of a divided Washington and gets access to top secret briefings, his views and tactics have evolved.
I need to throw this out there, and I noticed this immediately when it happened, and I brought this up on, I think it was Mercado Media Show yesterday when he had me call in. Hey, Glitterbell, thanks for the raid. I appreciate it. It seemed from the way that Mike Johnson was talking that somebody scared the shit out of him in a committee hearing. Not a committee hearing, in a classified hearing. That somebody sat him down and explained, like, hey, if you stop sending aid, it doesn't mean that the line just stays where it is. It could mean actually that the Ukrainians get pushed back. And by the way, you see these Shahid drones? They were shipped there by Iran. The models are from Iran. Or they sat him down and said, hey, you hear all that stuff from Marjorie talking about the Russians defending Christians. Here's how evangelicals are treated in occupied territory. Shortly before Mike Johnson did his big speech on supporting Ukraine, he met with an evangelical who had his wife and daughter killed by the Russians, talking about his experience. So maybe that moved him a little bit. But I think, honestly, he was in an intelligence briefing and they said the Iranians are supplying them. The Chinese are giving them drone parts. The Russians will not necessarily stop with Ukraine. We have reason to believe they might keep going on to places like Moldova. And when you listen to him talking, it sounds like he's scared. It sounds like he feels like he's trying to maybe fulfill his moment in history. I don't know how much of it is him just talking out of his ass because now he was able to maneuver a way to get Ukraine aid passed. So now he's going to be like, oh, I've always were supportive of Ukraine aid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And how much of it is he's actually scared by the hearing. But I do think he was genuinely scared by some private intelligence hearing from the way that he was talking. And as of yesterday, I read a report. It seems that he was scared in a private intelligence hearing. I saw a report from Pravda indicating that.
Reporting this morning with Annie Grayer and Melanie Zona highlights how the internal GOP battle unfolded behind the scenes and why Johnson defied his right flank, all the while risking his job on a foreign aid package that includes $61 billion in aid to Ukraine. And he was not afraid to call up House...
Wait, let's be clear. When we say $61 billion in aid, $20 billion replenishing American stockpiles, $7.8 billion alone, meaning the Ukrainians are going to have to pay us back. Like, let's, just making sure that when we say aid, one of these pieces of aid is a loan.
Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries to get the job done. And now hardliners are enraged.
I think every American in this country should be furious. This is the third betrayal by Mike Johnson.
I would characterize Speaker Johnson's handling of Ukraine and all of these other foreign aid bills surrender.
It's the way that they never prioritize center-right Americans' priorities. Never. And that's where we've ended up again. And I think it is pathetic.
When I say center-right Americans' priorities, if you check where the Republican Party base is getting their information about the war, they are getting it from political leaders that know very little to nothing about the war. Donald Trump is the #1 trusted source on the Ukraine war. He still thinks that we're giving the Ukrainians more money than the Europeans. He is way off base to the facts of what's happening on the ground. And he's not particularly following the facts on the ground. And so there's a question of like, Well, I think that keeping America out of a major war in Europe, which a war between Russia and a NATO state, isn't the priority of all Americans. I would also say that Europe being our main export market, their economic stability and their stability as an entity is important for our export economy. If you want to keep the manufacturing jobs we still have in the United States, the last thing we want to do is see the market that buys those manufacturing products smashed. There's also a question about American deterrence, American credibility with the promises we've made to Ukraine, which I think is the, importance of every American. The last thing I want to do is have America's political capital or deterrence or credibility on the world stage degraded, meaning that the entity that all these people pay into, including right center Americans, that money that they're putting into the government, they're getting less bang for their buck, because before they paid $10 for a government, maybe that word was slightly respected in Europe and therefore could defend its interests, and then they'd be paying the same amount of money due to the actions of the government, due to them not standing with their allies, whose credibility is worth less, and therefore their dollar goes not as far when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to negotiation, when it comes to geopolitics. I think it can be a priority for center-right Americans too. I think it's a question of how this is being explained to voters. That's not to say that everybody likes it. I understand why a libertarian might not like it, might not like supporting Ukraine, but a lot of this is not based in a sit-down, clear-headed evaluation of what's best for the future of the country.
It's honestly, it's tough to defend him right now.
It's a slap in the face to America.
Is he showing that he's out of his element here?
Well, what he's showing is that in my humble opinion, we are allowing Chuck Schumer to run the House of Representatives, and to me, that's very disturbing.
Now, Johnson was torn between those loud voices on his right and the pleas of help from Ukrainian President Zelensky.
To be clear, 6 months they waited, and then they altered it for like a 1-seat majority for the Republicans in the House. They altered it, made part of it a lend, and make it part of it a loan instead of aid. You got to add other addendums and other parts of it to try to shift it to make it like NAFTA plus. It's the same thing, but you put a plus in front of it so Johnson can feel better. Because all of the other alternatives, like, okay, how about an immigration compromise? They said no. And then everybody's angry because there's no immigration compromise. It's because Trump sank it. Don't get angry at the people who negotiated this bill and had to go forward because there's a war going on. As you want to sit on your hands and do nothing, blame the person who sunk the immigration deal. I think we gave too much in the immigration deal. We should have asked for dreamer protection.
As well as many in the GOP. Plus, sources say a recent classified CIA briefing helped convince Johnson, as did some prayer. What changed for him?
Well, he went through a transformation, no question. But also, I think he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, and it really was falling on him. And I was with him the night before he made the decision. He prayed on it, and the next day, he said, I want to be on the right side of history. And I think he will be.
Now, since hardliners are still pushing to oust him, he'd need Democrats to keep his job. But despite this move on Ukraine, some on the left say they should not help a conservative speaker.
I believe that the Democratic base will have a lot of pointed questions for Democrats who vote to keep Mike Johnson in the Speaker's chair.
Backlash?
I think there will be a backlash.
I mean, this is...
Look, if there's a deal on one specific piece of legislation that, hey, if you vote for this thing that's unpopular, we'll save you in this one instance, I'm not against that. But the idea that we'll save him in perpetuity as his party eats him up, no, I'm not comfortable with that. If the Republicans are so determined to shoot themselves in the foot going into an election year, and we have to reward a 6-month delay with a permanent dedication as Mike Johnson's strongest soldiers in the Democratic Party, yeah, I'm not okay with that.
This has really been a fascinating moment. You really rarely see a politician evolve like this, just really in real time. Typically, people are dug into their positions, especially in this era of politics. One reason why he is in a bit of a pickle with his colleagues is the way the vote came down. The minority of House Republicans voted to approve Ukraine aid. That is 101 Republicans voted yes, 112.
Look at that. Not a single Democrat voted against aid to Ukraine. Every single Democrat, from the most conservative to the most progressive, voted in favor of Ukraine aid. It is clear which party is decisive on supporting Ukraine. The majority of Republicans voted against Ukraine aid when it was a clear up or down vote. No immigration, no nothing else. Just clear up and down vote, which it should have been from the start. You don't want to overcomplicate things, put a million different hooks and bells and whistles for one of these bills to get caught on something and overcomplicate it, which is what happened with the immigration package. Because then, the question of the election, not a question of policy, but a question of electoral politics, came in and destroyed what should have been a simple Ukraine bill. But now, here we are, clean up or down. Majority Republicans voted against it. Not a single Democrat voted against it.
No, all Democrats voted for it. And it's Johnson's deal cutting over the last 6 months, a speaker that have enraged those folks on the right, whether it's government funding over on this issue of foreign aid bills, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Acts, and the National Defense Authorization Act, too. You've covered Mike Johnson really since he became a member. What is your takeaway from his handling of this?
Okay, we'll listen to his opinion, then we're going to move on to the next segment because I don't want to just watch a full CNN segment.
I honestly am surprised he did the Ukraine bill. For a long time, my colleague Jake Sherman and I would debate this. Is he going to do it? Is he going to do it? And, we thought he wasn't going to do it. And then but Democrats in the White House all thought throughout the process that they were talking to Johnson, they were talking to his top staff, that they had a channel to him and that he was listening to them. And that they thought there was a very good chance he would do it, and he ended up doing it. So, I was surprised he did it. I do think there will be an attempt to remove him now. That's clearly going to happen. A motion to vacate is what the technical term for it is. You had Marjorie Taylor Greene has already introduced this. She has several named co-sponsors of this.
Tony Neal's also signed on, or was it Thune? One of the two.
And will Democrats have to vote to keep him in place? I think... I was talking to one Republican yesterday. It's very interesting to me. The whole split inside the Republican Party. This Republican said there will never be another Republican speaker elected, even if they are majority, or at least in the next decade or two, without Democratic support. It just can't happen. There will be Republicans will have to have
what a statement. There'll never be another Republican House Majority Leader elected without Democrat support. If you want, unless you have a supermajority, and you want to govern, that is going to come with some compromises being needed with Democrats. If Democrats control the Senate or the presidency and they have veto power, you're going to have some compromise. But for the fringes of the party, any compromise, period, is a sign of, as has been indicated by Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, surrender. Any negotiation with the current party that controls the presidency and the Senate is a sign of surrender. It's not a sign of surrender. It's a sign of reality. It's acknowledging reality on reality's terms and having to deal with it, which is going to include negotiation.
Coalition governments, because they can't govern and be pure. Yeah. That, these guys want purity. They want to fight it out in the election with their guys. They're as angry as Republicans as Democrats are.
Yeah, it's such a good point. One of these congressmen is the leader of the House Freedom Caucus, Bob Good. He's actually opposed to moving forward to oust Mike Johnson, even though he was one of the 8 who voted to oust Kevin McCarthy in the fall. And a lot of people blame that vote.
I gotta say, right, from a catharsis point of view, from just a hardcore, just electoral point of view, it would be very funny if Ukraine aid passes and then Mike Johnson gets ejected and then the Republicans just go into fucking chaos for another month. And it's not like they're getting anything really done on the House floor anyway, but I like them to get something done. And I do not want to, if there was a deal made about protecting his speakership to get the Ukraine aid through, I wouldn't want Democrats to go back on their word just for political points. There needs to be some credibility between the two parties in order for you to have some level of negotiating. But if there's no deal made, then, that would have to mean Mike Johnson has another card up his sleeve, which might just be the electoral doom Republicans might face if they really decide that more chaos in the House, in the most unproductive House session since the Great Depression, is really what American people want to see before an election. Let's move on to the next segment. Let's see. I'm trying to think, where do we start when it comes to the reactions to Ukraine aid? Because there's so many different angles we could go with. You know what? We could first start with some debates on the House floor, because people started debating Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendments and whether they should support Ukraine or not. And Representative Adam Smith and Marjorie Taylor Greene went at it for a little bit. Let's check out these clips. I don't want to watch too much of the debate on the House floor because I'm quite frankly, I'm sick of watching these suits yell over this. It's been 6 months.
For nothing. Ukraine is not even a member of NATO. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. But the most important thing you hear in
Israel isn't a member of NATO. She supports aid to Israel.
Washington, D.C. is, oh, we have to spend Americans' hard-earned tax dollars over to Ukraine and keep...
Everything she said might have the slightest, even if I disagree with it on its merits, on principle, it might have the slightest credulity of an inch of soul to it if she didn't also support aid to Israel.
Keep the money going to continue to murder Ukrainians, wipe out an entire generation of Ukrainian men so that there are widows, there are fatherless orphans, there are not enough men to work in their industries. Oh, but you really support Ukraine.
Let me just throw a few things out there. You could use this logic for literally any defending force. You want to send aid to Poland? They have no chance against the Nazis and the Soviets. You want to send guns and tanks into the Soviet Union to Stalin's regime? The Kiev just fell. Moscow's gonna fall next. There's nothing you can do. You just want to take all of the Slavs, all of the Russians, and grind them into German machine guns, and you pretend you care? You pretend you care about the Russian people? You could use this logic to go after any defending army in a war. Look, if maybe her argument would have some sense if we didn't see what's happening in occupied territory to evangelicals, to Baptists, to Protestants, to anybody who just happens to be in the range of a Russian rifle, to people who get detained for just suspicions of crime, for people who get detained for speaking Ukrainian, for people who get detained for having pro-Ukrainian sympathies, for people who get detained because they get misidentified, the systematic torture that UN report after UN report has found, the illegal use of chemical weapons, the largest mass graves since World War II being uncovered, over 444 bodies dumped into one ditch, and that's one ditch. That's one ditch in Izium. What about the ditch in Bucha? What about the ditches all across occupied territory? What about the largest ditch outside of Mariupol, which AP projects holds between 35,000 to 75,000 bodies in a city of over 400,000? That's a significant chunk of the city, isn't it? Significant chunk. If we were just looking at this in isolation and just saying you give them weapons, they use the weapons to fight, then war happens, then, I mean, in the purest sense of the word, yes, we're giving them weapons which they're going to use in combat. But that views war as a concept in isolation from the circumstances the war is happening in. It's very reductive and, of course, as always, very stupid.
Wow, what kind of support is that? It's
what kind of support is weapon? Okay, how could you support Israel with weapons? All you're doing is perpetuating the, like, you could do this for any cause that she supported military aid for. Like, this logic extends nowhere. Repulsive.
You know, shame on the American government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to focus on one argument of the sponsor of this amendment, who's basically saying that if we pass this bill, we are advocating the killing of Ukrainians. That is a uniquely demented way of looking at this war. Putin invades. Putin, as we speak, is bombing and killing Ukrainian civilians. And the only thing that is reducing the number that he can kill is the Ukrainians' ability to fight back. So to look at this from a pure Russian propaganda standpoint, they invade, they bomb, they kill, and it's our fault for helping the Ukrainians defend themselves. That is the argument here against supporting Ukraine, and it literally makes no sense. If you want peace, give the Ukrainians the strength to stop Putin. He is the one that will not come to the bargaining table right now because he thinks he's winning. He thinks he can go all the way to Kyiv. He thinks he can take the whole country. If we give the Ukrainians the ability to stop him, that forces him to the table. It makes no sense to say that giving the Ukrainians the ability to defend themselves is what's killing them, when it is very clearly the Russians that are killing them.
Just like a quick analogy I want to give. The first time I was in Kharkiv, it was terrible. And I'm not saying I don't like Kharkiv. I mean, the bombing was terrible. We were within range of artillery. It slammed into the city, rockets slammed into the city. It was awful. Grad rockets were terrible, and we'd have to take cover, and the city felt semi-lifeless. Second time I come back in 2023, A lot of people had returned. I could go to the aquarium. I went to these different restaurants. I highly recommend the Argentina Grill. It's expensive. It is expensive, but their food is very good. And I had a nice time there. Third time I go around, this time I'm looking in the Kharkiv TV tower is blowing up every other day. People are having to stay in the corridor. When I go there, I'm probably going to have to stay in the corridor. The city's getting bombed quite frequently. And it's in large part due to the degradation of air defense and air defense systems as the Russians try to hammer the city. By giving them air defense, they can protect their cities. By giving them the ability to push back the Russian army back in 2022 in the Kharkiv counteroffensive, they were able to push Russian artillery guns out of range in Kharkiv, and civilian casualties in Kharkiv went down. To make it a simple equation of more gun mean more death, it's silly.
And I would also note that no president has added more to the deficit in one 4-year, or the debt, sorry, in one 4-year term than President Trump. And I didn't hear a single Republican complaining about the debt or the deficit during that period of time. The Ukrainians need our help to bring peace, to stop Putin, to stop what he is trying to do. Also, to Ms. McCollum's point, this also helps our industrial base. We face a dangerous world.
Wait, Marjorie Taylor Greene voted against Israel aid in the end? That's weird, because, I mean, she's very supportive of Israel. Is she now against Israel aid? Is this an attempt to be more consistent? Is Marjorie Taylor Greene against Israel aid? 1 second. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Israel aid. Man, everything I'm finding is just about her bringing up this Jewish space laser thing right now. I have to go back and check.
Between Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, all of whom are working together, by the way.
The only reason I'm asking is because before she was in support of Israel aid. If she's changed her position recently, then maybe that's changed. But as far as I know, up till recently, she was in favor.
If we don't help Ukraine stop Russia, that helps Iran, that helps China, that helps North Korea. This is about our national security, which I am quite confident that whether asleep or awake, the American people also care dearly about. Please defeat this amendment and support Ukraine and support United States national security interests. Thank you. I yield back.
I love that like half of Marjorie Taylor Greene's like amendments were just, how do I put this? They were just like, take all the aid and give it to Hawaii. Take all the aid and give it to all these other countries. Imagine if one of them actually passed. Imagine if one of these things actually got through and they did. And it's like, okay, we're just going to send all these ATACMs to Hawaii. They're going to use the ATACMs to fight the wildfires. Let me look. By the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene was especially molding. Look at this. Look at her reaction to the aid passing and people waving little Ukraine flags in Congress. Mike Johnson's House of Representatives, so proud to work for Ukraine, not the American people. It's despicable. Why can somebody not think, why could somebody not be in the position that they support an ally, they support that ally because they believe it's in the best interest of their country, and it comes from a patriotic position? Why can it not be that you both support Ukraine and the American people? If this was like 1939 and they were waving little British flags, would you say, "Ha, you don't really love America because you think that the Germany should lose this"? That you're waving a little British flag. It's silly. It's silly aesthetic politics. There's no substance to it. There's zero substance to it. I think we should just get through Marjorie Taylor Greene as soon as we can, because I honestly just don't want to talk about her anymore. So let's just get through the last Marjorie Taylor Greene one and be done with it. So Marjorie Taylor Greene did I believe a quick interview on TV to talk about her positions and talk about her opposition to everything. And I wanted to check it out. I wanted to see her vigorous defense as she's the last warrior against Ukraine aid. And look at the way she's talking about it. When they say that Mike Johnson is going to face a recall vote in the near future, he very much might face a recall vote in the near future, even if it might mean throwing his speakership under under the train tracks. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, could you just say all of this and then just not do it? Mike Johnson's speakership is over. He has betrayed Republicans by handing the gavel to Joe Biden. What, you mean the president of the United States? Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and the rest of the Democrats. He betrayed us on border security. Well, I mean, I'd honestly point towards Trump betraying you guys on border security. You could have gotten so many compromises that many progressive Democrats, me included, were unhappy with. And instead, you just shot it in the foot. Trump shot it in the foot because it was an election year. So I'd more throw Trump under the rail for that one. He betrayed us on funding endless wars. I mean, you say betrayed us, but he said since the first day of his speakership that he would not abandon Ukraine. So technically, if you're holding him by his word, since what he said at the start, he didn't betray you on funding it. Also, it's been going on for 2 years, going on 3 years now. The word endless war has lost all meaning. It is now no more than a catch-all term that people just throw out at any war that lasts longer than a week. Endless war. We fought in Afghanistan for 20 years. It's been 2. It's been 2 years. Endless war. It literally could not be endless war unless we refreeze the conflict, which Marjorie Taylor Greene is very excited to. It's a war that could not sustain itself in perpetuity just due to the high losses of men, vehicles, artillery, etc. Now, I mean, if you try to freeze it and then unfreeze it, maybe you could make it one, but I would advocate against that. Anyway, he betrayed us on FISA, and he's betraying us on fully funding Biden's DOJ. Mike Johnson did it all by working with the Democrats. It's time for him to resign, so Republicans can elect a speaker who will work with our party. So she wants him to resign. That's not going to happen. So maybe she's calling for a resignation because she knows that if she calls a recall vote, that could be politically disastrous for the party. Let's see what she has to say.
What Marjorie fails to notice is that we have been fighting on the border. We fight on it every day. We passed our comprehensive border security package, H.R. 2, at the very beginning of this Congress. It's been sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk. We passed all the resolutions. We passed these acts out of the House, and they get stopped in the Senate.
And that was the Speaker of the House, Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson, with me here last weekend, referring to Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene's threat to file a motion to vacate the Speaker's chair after the Republican-led House passed a $1.2 trillion spending bill last month with still no new security at the southern border, and then yesterday passed an additional $95 billion in new foreign aid.
I don't know how you even have this conversation without mentioning the fact that Trump sabotaged any compromises on the border until after the election and openly said that. I think the reason you can't is because if you say that out loud, it makes it feel like you're treating it more like a political tool less than a serious policy issue, which Trump is doing, and it's how he's always used it. I mean, Mexico's going to pay for the wall. It was a joke from the start, but he threw it out there because it was a brand. It was an aesthetic. It was an issue to campaign on, not an issue to solve.
$60 billion of which is going to Ukraine. Since then, 2 other congressmen have joined Taylor Greene's effort to vacate the chair. Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massey and Arizona Congressman Paul
it was
Gosar.
Thomas Massey. I thought it was Thune. I said Thune earlier. Yeah, but no, it's Massey.
Saying that Speaker Johnson surrendered House Republican leverage to secure the border by tying urgent aid to Israel to Ukraine. But the Congresswoman did not.
Again, Donald Trump said no compromise. If they have a problem, go complain to Trump. Massey, Paul Gosar, and Marjorie Taylor Greene should go to Trump and say, why did you say no compromise on the border unless you get everything Trump wanted, which you're not going to get when Democrats control the Senate and the presidency. If it's a real national security issue, if you're concerned about all the people crossing the border right now, then you should try to get whatever you can for the time being. But you didn't. You threw it out. And so how can you now come out and say, oh my God, he surrendered by not getting anything on the border? If he would have gotten anything on the border, Trump would have killed him.
Ultimately filed the motion after the vote yesterday. Joining me now with the very latest is the woman herself in this Sunday Morning Futures exclusive, House Oversight Committee member, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Congresswoman, thanks very much for being here. I want to give you the opportunity to respond to critics. First off, yesterday we saw the bills pass, and you did not file the motion to vacate. Why not?
That's right, Maria. I've been responsible with this the entire time. I support our majority, and I support having the majority in 2025. But I'm a representative of the people, Maria, and I do not represent Washington, D.C., New York Times,
Mostly the schizophrenic people, but people nonetheless.
Any of these media companies and other Republican colleagues of mine that are criticizing me, even the speaker himself. Most of those people have lost their way and they aren't listening to the American people. The people are fed up. Last Monday was tax day, April 15th. And Washington betrayed the American people by sending $93 billion to support foreign wars while doing nothing, absolutely nothing to secure our border. That is a...
Okay, but if you think that's a betrayal, Trump has a major role in that betrayal because Senator Langford from your party negotiated a deal that would address both issues at the same time, even though they shouldn't have been tied together. They shouldn't have been tied. Somebody negotiating the merit of hiring more election judges is very separate from whether or not there's merit in giving Ukraine ATACMS missiles. Putting them in the same piece of legislation is a type of bundling that I've heard criticized constantly from the right, like people from Matt Gaetz, and we're calling for Mike Johnson to not engage in going in to his new speakership. But then immediately, once it's useful as a delaying tactic, as a tactic to stop efforts you don't want, then no, bundle all you want, bundle away, combine different issues to your heart's content, even if those efforts are bound to fail, which we know now the immigration effort was due to Donald Trump's opposition.
Complete betrayal. And then once this bill was passed, the American people saw on their television screens and social media all over where Congress was waving the Ukrainian flag on the United States House of Representative floor. All of this was possible because of the betrayals of Mike Johnson, Maria. He has completely betrayed.
He's always said he was going to support Ukraine. I mean, he said he wouldn't abandon it. And I think he kind of did, low key, for 6 months. But I mean, this was like a delivery on a delayed, long overdue promise.
The Republican Party. He has completely betrayed Republican voters all over the country, and he is absolutely working for the Democrats.
By the way, the last polling number I saw was, I think it was 56 to 40 supports more aid to Ukraine, continuing to send aid to Ukraine. So 16-point difference. I mean, even in the worst polls, it's a plurality. But there's no poll that says that a majority of people don't support it. Or if you do find a poll, you have to like word it in like a weird way, or they have to word it as I haven't been able to find anything that says otherwise outside of like a few rinky-dink online polls.
And voters all over the country, and he is absolutely working for the Democrats, passing the Biden administration's agenda. So this is a speakership that is completely over with. It's only Mike Johnson is the one that's trying to hang on to it and is in complete denial.
Well, look, you just heard the speaker with me last week saying she doesn't, she's missing the fact that we already passed H.R. 2. But I think, some of the criticism is because and by the way, you're getting criticized on the left, on the right, in the media, everybody, a lot of people are criticizing you. And the reason that they are is because they're saying that you're creating drama during this election year. How is this leading to reelecting President Trump? How is this leading to the American people believing that the Republicans can govern? People are saying, look, she's creating chaos. She's making the entire party look like it's disrupted. Your reaction and response to those criticisms?
Yeah, those that are calling this drama are the very people that are responsible for the drama that the American people are having to live through every single day.
By the way, just for the millionth time, and I keep saying this, nobody can give the old hippy dippy, my old roundtable show, or any of these drama mongers on the internet too much shit. Because, man, you get to the halls of Congress, and how different is it really? Human beings are human beings no matter wherever they go.
Those on the left, those on the right, the uniparty that's in control of our government are the ones that have inflicted the American people with nearly $35 trillion in debt, ripped their border wide open, and refuse. Speaker Johnson refuses to use.
By the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene voted in favor of the Trump budgets. We supported the Trump budgets. Supported Trump. And wait, I don't know about voted in favor of the Trump budgets because I would have to go back and check. She got elected in 2018? Or was it 2020? Either way, she did support Donald Trump, who ran up the highest debt of any American president. The Trump tax cuts ran up the deficit much larger than any Ukraine bill has even ever imagined to. Even the highest, like I remember Lindsey Graham talking earlier about 110 billion for Ukraine in the next bill. I haven't seen anything. I mean, even if that was passed, it wouldn't come close to the deficit impact and the debt impact that the tax cuts had, largely targeted towards the upper echelons of society.
Use his power as Speaker of the House to do any type of negotiating to secure the southern border and stop the madness in our country. The people.
There was 5 months of negotiation. How did she just check out? Did she go into like a short coma that I was unfamiliar with, that she didn't know about the negotiations between Chris Murphy, Senator Langford, and all these? Did she not see the plan? The plan was released. It was public knowledge.
Criticizing me are not the American people. The American.
They are Americans, okay? They are Americans. Let me throw this out there. There's nothing more annoying to me in politics than this constant posturing about the American people, this constant hand waving to the American people. I got to do this more. You know, some of you in chat are thinking about not donating, but that's not what the American people want. The vague American people want you to donate to Dylan Burns TV. The vague American people believes there should be no white names in site chat because Druidism, Star Trooper, and the rest of them all are going to get subs. The real American people think you should find the numbers on the front of your mommy's credit card and the 3 on the back and send it to DylanBurnsTV@gmail.com. That's what the American people is requesting. Like you can just hand wave to this. Back it up with something. Back it up with something. Every politician believes the American people wants what they want because everybody thinks that their perspective is the American people's perspective. But the sad fact is, Marjorie, the numbers don't add up. The majority of Americans in every major poll continues to say that they want to keep sending support to Ukraine. She stands against what the majority of the American people want. Now, that doesn't mean that is the position of the American people. You can say that's the position of the majority of the American people. There is no one American people. There's American people that are against aid. There's American people that are supportive aid. It just so happens that the majority of the American people, and it's not even close, double digits, are in favor of Ukraine aid. That doesn't mean that's the position of the American people, because there is no singular American people. It's a group. It's a large group. And so anybody that tries to claim all of the American people, I immediately get suspicious of. Because why do you need to make these like vague appeals to the people and the folks and the people of the nation when you don't have the right to claim them? Why do you need to claim them? What type of wool are you trying to pull over my eyes here?
People agree with me, and I've talked to them, and I've seen it all over. They are outraged, and what they're saying is they don't want to vote for Republicans anymore because in their eyes, their opinion and how they feel and how they're treated, the Republican Party in charge right now is no different than the Democrat Party. It's one big uniparty that serves the world first and America last.
Can't let the shallow state win.
Thank you for listening to the American people, AB425. You are a true patriot.
Our country. The people criticizing me are not the American people. The American people agree
They literally are. They also have American citizenship, Marjorie.
With me, and I've talked to them, and I've seen it all over. They are outraged, and what they're saying is they don't want to vote for Republicans anymore because in their eyes, their opinion and how they feel and how they're treated, the Republican Party in charge right now is no different than the Democrat Party. It's one big uniparty that serves the world first and America last. So I really could care less about.
The majority of Republicans voted against it. That is quite literally a difference you can see right now.
About their criticism. They didn't send me to Washington. I do not work for them. As a matter of fact, I came to Washington because I myself, as a regular American, was fed up with the uniparty as well. So you want to know something? I don't apologize for standing firm in my belief and my faith and my absolute allegiance to the United States of America. As a matter of fact, I am cemented in this, and I will fight harder for our country. The Republican Party is the party that needs to change, and they need to start reflecting the will of their voters and actually do the.
I love my country, and I feel compelled to gift subs to site chat.
Amen. It's what the American people, TM, would have wanted. Captain TBT, thank you for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs. Wait 1 second. I'm getting a patriotism report from the American people. They're also saying that just like Captain TBT gifted 5 tier 1 subs to Dr. Osmosium, Feudalist Realism, Shasti, GGGHT, and Nordic Rest, people can also go to Dylan Burns TV on Patreon to support the channel, or if they got an Amazon Prime account, they can connect it to their Twitch account and get a Twitch Prime to gift the channel for free. My goodness. The American people give me visions, and they shall guide our channel to a glorious future in the great beyond.
As a matter of fact, I am cemented in this, and I will fight harder for our country. The Republican Party is the party that needs to change, and they need to start reflecting the will of their voters and actually do the job instead of just running their mouth constantly every single campaign cycle.
I guess what I'm saying is, how does this help keeping a majority in the House? How does this help by electing your candidate? Your candidate. I want to take a break, and I want to ask you what your plan is. So you're threatening Mike Johnson. You say he's not doing what the people want. What is your alternative? Stay with us, Georgia Congresswoman. That's what I want to hear from you next. Marjorie Taylor Greene is here, and we'll be back in 1 minute's time. Welcome back, and I am back with Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Okay, Congresswoman, you wanted Mike Johnson out. What is your alternative plan?
Our plan is this: we have to get.
This is a great question because, okay, you don't want Mike Johnson. We've gone through, we went through Kevin McCarthy. We went through Tom Emmer. That didn't work. Went through Steve Scalise. That didn't work as options. Jim Jordan tried a bunch and failed again and again and again because he was just too much. And a lot in the Republican Party, a lot of people in the Republican Party just don't like the guy on a personal level, on a working level. And so who next instead of Mike Johnson? The reason Mike Johnson got the job, despite his lack of experience, is because, quite frankly, people didn't have a reason to hate him enough. Tom Emmer, part of the reason he couldn't be House Speaker when it looked like he was really close to becoming it is because A, Trump got against him, and B, he voted in favor of gay marriage on the federal level during the last time it was voted on like 2 years ago. After, Roe versus Wade was overturned, there was legislation that went through the House that was like, what about gay marriage? In case, the courts overturned gay marriage, it would be cool if we had it on the federal level so it doesn't become like a legalistic mess. And that's what Democrats are pushing. Tom Emmer, thinking that the times had changed, voted in favor of it. Then that was thrown in his face in negotiations to become House Speaker. That stopped him. If something as small as that can stop someone becoming House Speaker right now, and you're going to choose someone like Mike Johnson just because he's been in there so short, that for such a short period of time that nobody hates him enough. So, okay, Mike Johnson, like, you got to have a good alternative. You got to have names you can throw around.
You wanted Mike Johnson out. What is your alternative plan?
Our plan is this: we have to give the American people a reason to trust us and fight for us. The American people are supporting President Trump to be the next president of the United States because they've seen him in action. He fought against the Democrat agenda. He put America first. They desperately want him to lead this country again because they trust him and they know he will do that.
It's really convenient that the American people and Marjorie Taylor Greene seem to have no layer of separation between her beliefs and their beliefs. It's very lucky for her.
Johnson has betrayed America. He's betrayed Republican voters. Under his leadership, he's passed the Democrat agenda.
By the way, when we say like betrayed America, what do we do when there's like an actual betrayal of America? Like what do we do when there's like, yes, I sold out to the Chinese. Yes, I sold American nuclear secrets to the Chinese. Yeah, that's what I did. Like there's somebody, Senator Menendez, he betrayed America. He took Egyptian gold bars in order to serve Egypt's interests over America's interests. He did not develop a close relationship with the Egyptians because he loved Egypt so much. He developed a close relationship with the Egyptians because he wanted that gold bar. That's a betrayal of the United States in favor of money. When something like that happens, and like everything, if somebody votes against you and that's just a betrayal of the United States because they just voted separately than you did, like, what do we start calling these instances where somebody literally betrays the United States? We've had multiple spies, both for the Russians and the Chinese, called before Congress to testify, not knowing they were spies, and we find out afterwards. How do we treat these situations with the seriousness they deserve if every little thing is considered a betrayal of the country itself?
system, and they know he will do that. Mike Johnson has betrayed America. He's betrayed Republican voters. Under his leadership, he's passed the Democrat agenda, passed the Biden administration's policies, and fully funded them. We're going to fight in Congress to do everything we can to stop this type of uniparty leadership. Mike Johnson's speakership is over. He needs to do the right thing to resign and allow us to move forward in a
She did not offer an alternative.
Controlled process.
Yeah.
If he doesn't do so,
She just said resign. She didn't offer an alternative.
he will be vacated.
Well, with all due respect, you didn't give me a plan for the speaker's role. And again, does this mean you are going to file that motion at some point?
It's coming regardless of what Mike Johnson decides to do.
Still
and
no
we
plan.
have 3 more
What's the plan?
Republicans joining us from special elections coming up very soon. So people need to know this can happen.
Congressman, thank you for being here. Georgia Congressman.
Look at her like, hey, we're going to have 3 extra seats. That's going to be a massive majority. Like a functional 4-seat majority is not impressive. A functional 4. Listen to that. We're going to have a functional 4-seat majority instead of a 1-seat majority. Like what? That's not impressive. That's not giving you a lot of wiggle room. That's what we started with.
7,776 has donated $5. Here is some highly taxed Nordic aid once again. Great to see the USA got its shit together with the Ukraine aid. Slava Ukraine.
It's a little late. You know, I wish they got their shit together a little earlier, 6 months ago when it was first brought up, especially since the aid bill is basically the same. And so we delayed it for the political futures of the legislators involved, not due to the policy priorities or policy recommendations. But hey, it got through. It's a massive victory. And all of the worst people on the internet are so angry. In fact, can we actually, I think we have a few we can drag up here. One last one. Let's do, I think we have one from Tristan Tate. Oh, and Christian Watson. Let's respond to 2 of these and then we'll wrap up. At least the Ukraine segment. First is from Christian Watson. I quote tweeted this because I just found this so melodramatic. This photograph, and this is a picture of different legislators holding Ukraine flags in support of the country that was invaded in the largest war in Europe since World War II, something of historical significance. This is a photograph taken on the floor of the United States House of Representatives early today. Rarely has one photograph ever been such an indictment of the death of patriotism in a nation. Okay, so you can support America and during a historical vote in relation to the largest war in Europe, to a country that we made commitments to, fighting for values that are at least ideologically similar to ones that we hold dear. We can fly a flag for 30 seconds after a bill that took 6 months to get through, 6 months of delays on top of the work beforehand. They can fly around a flag for 30 seconds without being accused of being anti-American. Like, does every American have to be like, other countries? I hate other countries. Other countries suck. Here in Congress, our stance is only America is great. If you show that support, especially if you root it in a place which can be in support of the country, for example, supporting Ukraine because keeping up our promises of defending them after they gave up their nuclear weapons, which was in the interest of us and the interest of everybody else, their nuclear security outside of the Ukrainians, allows us to have stronger credibility on the world stage. It also allows us to protect Europe, our main export market. There's ways you could argue from this from a pro-America standpoint, on top of the fact that it's within international law and perfectly moral for us to support the Ukrainians. The idea that waving a little white and blue, yellow and blue flag like strips you of your patriotism is quite silly. It really is quite silly. Now, let's look at the other one quick. Here we go. Tristan Tate. Ukraine has a very effective army of online trolls who do not understand what's happening in Ukraine, have never been to Ukraine, do not speak to people on the ground in Ukraine, who are convinced that Ukrainian men do die, he said do instead of to, because resist Putin, pray for the conscripts. So, this is the first thing. Ukraine has a very effective army, at least definitely relative to the region. You got to understand, they are holding back the largest country on the planet. That is something to talk about. That's something to brag about. And they're doing it when just 10 years before, no, 8 years before, if we're talking about the start of this war, they basically had to give up Crimea without a fight. And then you've had the ATO, which had any number of problems. And they had to heavily rely on volunteer units. The volunteer battalions, whether it be Right Sector, Azov, or the next volunteer battalions, any of those. So I would say, given the circumstances, over 2 years, holding back the largest army on the planet, delivering them devastating losses, drilling through like 20 to 30 to possibly 40% of their tank corps, I do not think you can just disregard that. And so, like, you can call it a joke, call it what you want. Ukraine has an effective army, and I will say that it's much more effective than the bribes that both the Tate brothers tried to give to Romanian authorities and then failed to give. I do not think Ukraine needs to be lectured on the effectiveness of its military force by a couple of cyber pimps. But the other thing about conscripts, the United States used conscripts in the Second World War and in other wars as well. Many nation states have used conscripts. If you are opposed to the idea of conscripts having been used in any war, certainly wars of self-defense period, then maybe you can stand on that point. But if your position is simply, I don't like conscripts in this war, when it was World War II and all the other wars that I find much more important than Ukraine's war of self-defense, then it's okay. I'm fine with conscripting people to defeat the Nazis. I'm okay with conscripting people if America was invaded, but I'm not okay when Ukraine does it. Then you're a hypocrite and I disregard you on face. I disregard you on face. But I also like the, resist Putin, and he puts it like this. People in Ukraine want to resist the Russians. They don't want the Russians there. They don't. They don't like seeing their family members dumped in mass graves, and it's like a fun soy jack or a fun meme. It's a question of national survival. But nothing can be taken seriously by either of these two schmucks, so it's like a soy jack, resist Putin, voice cracking meme, ha 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 ha. Also, I'd like to see Tristan Tate and Andrew Tate go to Chasav Yar if they want to talk to people on the ground. I'd be happy to bring them along.